Yeah, this was fantastic getting to walk around, and we actually did talk about plants some. Yeah, I was admiring this building. I came here and spoke a while back, and neither one of us can remember when that was. I don't know why I can't remember it. Dave's old as the hills, so that's why he can't. But I was admiring this, and you know, during our day-to-day, as we're walking through the amazing collections, we keep talking about, you know, special events and, you know, university facilities and what they do. And, you know, it's pretty sad when you get to that point. I knew I went over to the dark side when I was so excited about the new carpet and folding partition walls that went into our education center. That was like the big achievement. You know, I knew it was, I'd become more administrator than plantsman at that point, which was a little bit sad, but it is really nice carpet, so, you know, what can you do? So I always have to start. How many, have anybody, I know a couple people have been, how many people have been to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum? All right, got a few people. And that's always nice to hear. That's about the same ratio if I give a talk in Raleigh, where we're located, as, you know, you get about five or six hands. And I always like to start, you know, people, whenever you have something named after a person, it's nice to know who the person was. JC was really kind of an incredible plantsman, plant lover, plant evangelist. He you know, never saw a plant that he didn't like and want to propagate and give to you. He unfortunately passed away in 1996. He had an accident, and there was actually one person who was heavily recruited by the university and all the North Carolina nurserymen and everybody else, and he instead decided to stay in Texas because he had a fledgling garden that he wanted to get going, and you know, despite being under 6 inches of water today, I think he probably made a pretty good choice. But in 2001, Horticulture Magazine was celebrating their anniversary, and they commissioned this painting, A Heavenly Garden Party, and it's the 25 most important gardeners. And so you got some people like, you know, Thomas Jefferson, you know, no greater service to your country and introduce a new plant. You got, you know, Gertrude Jekyll and Ernest Wilson and Asa Gray, Capability Brown, all these, you know, people who are well known. If you look right here is J.C. Ralston, and he really did more, I think, to kind of change the way the nursery industry worked. When he came to NC State, his role was to increase the, you know, to help the nursery industry. He was a nursery extension specialist. And he had been all over, and he had developed this 90-40 rule. 90% of what you could get at any garden center was the same 40 plants. Different 40 plants maybe here in East Texas and Raleigh, but you were stuck. You couldn't buy them anymore. And so his thinking was, I can teach people how to, I can teach people how to shave you know, an extra half cent off of their production. I can help them that way. But really what we need is more diversity. If we diversify the American landscape, then you know, there's more opportunities for existing nurserymen, there's more opportunities for people to enter the industry, and so he just started collecting plants from everywhere, growing them, evaluating, giving them away. There, you know, a lot of nurserymen tell stories about ducking and running for cover when they saw JC with bags of plants, because he'd be relentless with the plants that he was giving away. But really, you know, when you look around now, that, you know, you go to your big box store, and we complain about them a lot. The diversity they have in a big box store is better than what you could get at a good garden center 40 years ago. So it really is in part due to JC. I do like that they got him, if you can see, it's a little small, but in his hands he has pruners there, clippers. And he was well known, notorious, infamous for liberating cuttings from places wherever he went. He was a busy man, didn't always have time to ask permission before he did that. But whatever he took, it was not for him. It was to grow out and to get on to other people. And he never could understand why gardens would hoard their plants. And so we continue that. We give out 4,000 plants every year to our members free. It's first Saturday in October. It's worth a trip. It's one of the 8 horticultural wonders of the world is our plant giveaway. It's over in 15 minutes. It's pretty amazing. You can YouTube it. It's on YouTube. It's pretty fun. So, now the Rolf Shrubbery, we're still doing the same things he was doing. We bring in plants from all over the place. We go out and collect plants from the wild. We go raid great gardens like here at SFA and Peckerwood, and we visit nurserymen. We go all over the place and we plant things out, and and our ones of this, ones, twos of that occasionally. We hired somebody who's got a design background now in our garden. Now all of a sudden we have 3s of things put out. It's very discomforting. We're at 10.5 acres. We have 7,500 different plants planted out there in our 10.5 acres. So we don't have the biggest of much of anything because they get pruned with the chainsaw when they start getting too big. But we do try and make it look pretty while we're evaluating those plants. So for those of you a little farther away, I do want to point out we have a great website with a lot of great information. There's a lot of stuff. You can search all the plants we have in the garden. You can find where they are in the garden. You can get pictures of them. You can get information like when it was planted, what the size was the last time we measured it, which may have been 5 years ago, but you can get some information on growth rate and things like that from them. You can get a bloom calendar for plants. So how do we do all that? As Dave mentioned, we're a university garden, and so the university is generous in that it pays for my salary, and it pays for our water and our lights. Of course, we pay the university for all of our greenhouse space and for all of our heat and copiers and all those kinds of things. They did send me a letter. I got an email asking about our electricity use. So I have a feeling that next year I'm going to be paying for electricity too. But we do have great students at NC State. And I'm going to say this as the father of a 22 and a 20-year-old. I cannot vouch for all kids, all young adults, because I have some serious doubts about mine. But the horticulture students we have at State, and I am not a State grad, the horticulture students we have at State that we have out working in the garden are phenomenal. They are really incredible. I think the horticulture industry is in great hands with the students we have. And I will say, people always complain they're always on their phones. I look around rooms and like this, and I'll see a lot of people with gray hair or no hair, as in my case, on their phones and things like that. So I can't really blame these kids for them. And usually they're Googling a way to do something a lot quicker and better and more efficiently than the way that I told them to do it. So I've enjoyed working with the students. And we're living labs, so they come out there, they do work there. Not just horticulture, I don't think I can do the whole list, but ag education, ag engineering, chemistry is doing work with us, forestry. Unfortunately, plant pathology and weed science has work out there, entomology. Plant biology, you know what plant biology is, right? It's botany. There's no botany at NC State. You know why? Why is plant biology not botany? Because nobody Googles botany. They all want to be, prospective students want to be a marine biologist or a vet, and so they Google biology and they get tricked into seeing that plant biology exists. That is true. They changed the name. So, and the students, if you give them clear direction, they're fantastic. I give talks all over the place, and I was giving a talk to a nice group of very proper women from the Royal Horticultural Society when I was at the UK. And, there wasn't a single chuckle when this comes up. It reads differently in the UK than it does here. We do try and get information out. We've got some publications that are more for the professionals. This propagation guide, we'll be putting out a new copy of that this coming year. We do ones that this talk is based on, one's more for the homeowner. We really try and hit kind of all all aspects of horticulture when we're trying to do our extension, homeowners, professionals, both. So when Timber Press came to me and asked me to write this book, asked me about writing it, they said, why don't you write a book on gardening in the South? And, I don't like to write about things that I don't actually know. I've read a lot of gardening books, and it's amazing how many people have no problem with doing that, because there's a lot of bad information out there. But I said, well, okay, I've got experience, up in the mountains. I went to school in the mountains of Virginia. I worked at a nursery there, did landscaping there, have experience. In the Piedmont, I worked in Atlanta. I grew up in the Piedmont. I'm in Raleigh now. The coast, I was a decade on the Virginia coast. I spent long periods of the summer gardening on the Gulf Coast, in the Panhandle, and over in New Orleans with grandparents. So I felt like I had a pretty good sense of the South, what I thought was the South. So I asked, Timber Press, what do you consider the South? Because we all know Florida is a whole different thing, and I didn't want to even try and get into that. And they said, no, not Florida. And I said, how far west? Because this side of Texas, the wet side, I get. The dry side, I don't know anything about that. They said, no. So I felt like I had a pretty good handle on it. So I felt okay to kind of address these areas. And then the other big area is our urban landscapes. And it didn't go into this a ton in the book, but it's an important thing. I don't know about Texas, but North Carolina, the whole of the United States, the world, we're now predominantly urban. We have gone from being a majority rural world to majority urban world, and we've got to figure out how to keep our cities green. It's really important. I'm not going to really talk about it, but there is a lot there, and it's not just for the insects and the birds. It's really for us. We've got to live there. We've got to make these places livable, and you can do that. You can take something like a Piedmont prairie, and you can put it on a rooftop in South Carolina, and it works pretty darn well. So there is a lot you can do there. So gardening in the South, what is that? This is what people think of as gardening in the South a lot of times when you talk to them. My grandmother would say this is fancy gardening. The tulips match the tire. I wish I'd asked the person where I took this picture if they planted the tulips to match the tire or if they painted the tire to match the tulips. I don't know. Either way, they went through some effort. So before I get in too far, I have a confession. I'm a lazy gardener. I know a lot of people who garden because they love to garden. I don't garden because I love to garden. I garden because I love plants. And I love to be surrounded by plants, and I love interesting plants, and that's why I garden. I'd much rather be surrounded by plants and not garden, which is probably why I sit in an office in front of a computer all day instead of still being out in the garden gardening. But that's what I go for. When I was writing this book, that's really my goal, was to talk to people who are not already passionate about gardening and want to be out there, but to help people really succeed in the garden. And like most things in life, you got to put some capital in. If you want to be a lazy gardener, you got to do some work. And the biggest thing is the soil, right? And we all know the key to good soil is organic matter. If you got red clay like we have in Raleigh, add organic matter, provides drainage. If you got pure sand, you add organic matter, it adds water retention, right? So organic matter. So you've seen this, right? This is important. See, if you're taking notes, take your notes now. You got a layer of brown sticks, 4 to 6 inches, and then some brown material, and then green, no more than 2 to 4 inches, the brown, green, brown. Keep it as moist as a wrung out sponge. This is the stupidest thing that has ever been perpetrated on the gardening public. Who would look at this and say, yeah, I think I'll compost because my garden gives me little bits of green and brown in alternating layers, so I can compost this. This is ridiculous. I've been doing this professionally for 25 years, and here's a pro tip for you. When plants die, they compost. That's what happens. Otherwise, we'd be buried under unbroken down plants. This is ridiculous. I said this when I was talking to a master gardener group, and a guy came up after me and said that his whole talk the month before was on compost based on these composting things. Oh well. All you need is a pile. You know, you can pile it up. You can do it in bins like this. I live on a cul-de-sac, so at home, I just go out in the woods. I'm surrounded by woods on two sides because I'm at the end of this cul-de-sac, and I make piles out there with my compost. And I always say I'm going to use it back in the garden, but I never do. I just plant there. I'm like, ooh, nice raised bed here, and start planting in it. But I get people who are really concerned. They say, I try to compost, and it doesn't work. And because they say it doesn't work because when they finish composting, they can still see that there are plants that made up that compost. Unless you've got a big operation with huge piles that you're turning regularly, you know, you're still going to be able to tell that this is made up of plant material. You're going to have leaves in there. You're going to have sticks in there. That's okay. You're just breaking that down. You don't have to feel guilty if you don't want to compost because most home gardens don't produce enough compost to do more than fill a little flower pot. They just don't make that much. So if you don't have room for a compost pile, that's fine. People feel terrible guilt about it, but you don't have to do that. But if you want to, and if you get enough, you just make a pile. If it's a new pile, you get a shovel full of soil in there to get those microbes going. You can water it. I don't know about you. I know there are people here, because y'all are here listening to me talk at 7 o'clock at night on a Thursday, who go to the garden centers or go to the plant sale here and buy a bunch of plants, and they have they have them all waiting to go in the ground at their house and trying to figure out where they go. I don't do that. I'm a lazy gardener. If I buy a plant, it goes in the ground because I'm not watering it. If it goes in the ground, it has a fighting chance. If it doesn't, it's toast. That is the way it is at my home. So you can water your compost pile to keep it as wet as a wrung out sponge, but if I'm not watering plants, I am certainly not going to be watering my compost pile. And when it gets too dry, what happens? It stops composting. When it gets wet again, it'll start back up. It just makes the process slower. If you go out to your compost pile and it smells like ammonia, it needs some air in there. You stick a fork in there, turn the pile over, you're fine. It's not rocket science. People do it all the time. Plants do it naturally without people helping out at all. It's easy. We, and whatever you have, it's all about organic matter. Carbon's carbon. You're getting carbon in the soil. If you're in Maine and you have lobster compost, hey, use lobster compost. It's organic matter. Whatever you got, use it. Does not matter. So, we mulch with partially decomposed leaves at the Arboretum. And that's because we have a lot of established beds. And, people always talk about, add organic matter to your beds, right? Well, that's great if you're starting from scratch. What if you have a overstory, you have plants there, you're going to take everything out so you can put it in? No, if you mulch regularly with organic matter that breaks down, you're going to provide, over time, organic matter to the soil. It's a lot slower, but, we're gardeners, we're patient. As you have clear space, you can till it up a little bit and till that in. But it's that organic matter. And people buy mulch specifically so it doesn't break down. They want the mulch that lasts the longest. But really what you want is your mulch to break down. If your mulch breaks down, you're adding organic matter to there. It helps that we have 350 volunteers who put in about 12,000 hours of labor a year. Makes it a lot easier to keep things mulched that way. But see how nice we are? It's a cold day out there. People are taking off their coats because they're shoveling that warm compost. And speaking about mulch, people really don't understand why we use mulch. Good way to tell that, wait, you don't want to do this. But a good way to tell that a book was not written in the South is when they tell you that you're mulching for winter protection. Now, if you're getting some weird plant that was propagated from the gardens here that shouldn't be growing here and it's really marginal, maybe you'll mulch it for winter protection. But that's not why we mulch. We mulch to keep moisture in the soil and to keep the weeds down. You ever go to the UK in those gardens? They don't do any mulch. They just go out and very politely with a little shuffle hoe and get their little polite weeds. We don't have polite weeds. We have weeds that if you ignore them for a couple of days, they're waist high, right? So we got to keep the weeds down and keep moisture in the soil. So if you know that tells you something about mulching. To keep the weed seeds from germinating, you need enough mulch that you're blocking light. Most weed seeds germinate when they get light. So you want mulch thick enough that no light will get through. So if you're using the old big pine bark nuggets, do those still exist? Can you get those big nuggets? You got to go thick because the way they sit, light can get through there. If you're using something finer, if you're using pine straw, if you're using like pine chips or shredded mulch, you can go thinner. And you want to go thinner. More is not better, because what you want is moisture, water, rain to go through, and where you have different textures, whether it's going from clay to sand, whether it's going from mulch to your soil, you tend to have a barrier where the water doesn't go through. So you want the water to go through, but then not soak back up and keep the mulch wet. You want the mulch dry and then underneath there to stay wet. So if you go too thick, your mulch stays wet, and then you know what happens? The weeds just germinate in your mulch rather than trying to germinate underneath there. So it really is this kind of balancing act. And there's actually good research that shows if you go, the thicker your mulch is, here in the South, the thicker your mulch is, the more damage like your broadleaf evergreens will have if it's cold, because you won't get the heat radiating back up from the soil at night when our temperatures drop. So you're actually doing more harm for winter protection for your evergreen shrubs. This is not talking about trees. If you go too deep. Same thing if you're one of those people who goes out with sheets and things when you're going to get a freeze and cover your plants. I don't do that. Only the strong survive. But if you do that, you don't want to tuck them around under. You want to spread it out so you're capturing the warmth from the soil as it goes up. And of course, you obviously don't want to do this because this is contagious. It just keeps spreading. Bad horticulture spreads everywhere. It's tremendous. Now, I'm with a land-grant university, so I have an extension appointment, and I get a lot of questions about why plants die. And one of the biggest causes of death for plants are people, like probably some people in this audience, who go to their local garden center and buy plants that should be composted and plant them. Don't go, you go to your garden center and you walk past all the beautiful plants there and all their colorful branded pots and everything, and you go past all the broken down tables and the old flats and the piles of pots, and you go to that back corner where there's the scratch and dent sale, where you brag to your friends, I got this $150 tree for $10, and you take it home and you plant this tree. And you're good gardeners. You're not like me. You water it and you care for it, and it doesn't die. It doesn't die that year. It doesn't die the next year, but it's going to die. And at that point, you'll have forgotten that you bought junk, and you'll blame the nursery, you'll blame the plant, you'll blame yourself, and it's because you bought junk. There is nowhere else. Where else do you go and say, can I get something that is no good but cheap? You don't do that. You buy the best car you can afford. You might not be able to afford a Lexus, but you buy a good reliable car. You don't go anywhere and buy junk. And plants are the best investment you'll make. Most everything else in your life will depreciate, will get worse, you'll get rid of it. You bought a couch not long ago. Holy cow, that's expensive for a nice couch. That couch is not going to last that long. It'll last longer now that my kids are out of the house, but it's not going to last that long. But with plants, they just keep getting bigger and growing and looking better. Yes, some die, but overall, your success compared to your failure, those plants are going to do well. It is great. And people think they're expensive. They're not expensive. Plants are cheap. One that people always bring up is Daphne, right? Y'all grow Daphne down here? They die after about 5 years or so? Yeah. And people say, I won't buy one. I can only keep it alive 5 years. How much you pay for a 3-gallon? 30, $50? Say you pay $50. You're going to a high-end garden center. Get a $50 3-gallon Daphne odor, winter Daphne. Beautiful. Evergreen shrub. Doesn't get too big. You don't have to prune it. Winter flowers. It's fragrant. And people say, it'll die after 5 years. You paid $50. You got 5 years of great joy from this plant. And you think that's too much. Meanwhile, you go to Dead Lobster. You'll have a bad meal. You'll pay more than $50. You won't think twice about it. But somehow this plant, because it's only going to last 5 years. I've had cars that I've had less than 5 years. I mean, it's crazy to me. And think of any product that takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years to produce. Imagine that. Imagine if your car took 5 years to produce. Imagine if your iPhone took 5 years to produce. And in those intervening years, I had to be all laid out on the ground and dusted every day, right? That iPhone would be, $20,000. But plants, They got to be touched every day. They got to be watered. They got to be cared for. They got to pick them up and move them. Nurserymen love moving plants back and forth. And then they'll sell it, for, basically pennies for what you get. It's amazing. Buy good plants. You get much better luck. So extension specialist, I get these pictures. What do I do for my tree? Nothing. Get rid of it. We've already talked about that. Plants are cheap, right? Get rid of it. My plant gets this every year. What do I spray on it? Are you kidding me? Every year, unless your grandmother smuggled this out of Nazi-occupied Germany, there is no reason to keep this plant. People are unreasonably attached to plants that are bad. We got 7,000 different plants and 10 acres to arboretum. There are good plants out there. You don't need to live with a bad plant. I will go to somebody's house and they'll have some spiny, thorny thing right by their walkway, and it'll rip your pants as you're walking by, and they'll say, I hate that stupid thing. I got to cut it back twice a year. It's awful. And I say, well, rip it out. And they'll look at me like I have two heads. It's like, but it's healthy. Like, get rid of it. Oh, I love getting rid of plants. It is, cutting down things, ripping them out, and starting with new space. I love that. I don't know why people will go to the hassle of spraying stuff. I don't spray anything at my house. I would like to say it's because I'm very sustainably minded. No, it's because I'm lazy and I don't like chemicals. They stink. I don't like doing them. Why bother? If it's getting bugs all the time, rip it out. Put something else in. Come to the plant sale here. They got a million things that'll do great for you. I cannot believe how many people will keep plants they hate because they're healthy. And not all of them are healthy. And there are other plants, there are other problems. I won't go into insects. When the Japanese beetles come through that, I'm like, look at my nice lace leaf hibiscus. I learned to live. You live with the problems. There's something that will help with Japanese beetles, and I heard this, almost a decade ago, and I've been doing it, and I would love to do actual research, but anecdotally, planting this works. 4 o'clocks? 4 o'clocks, Mirabilis jalapa, the little self-seeding annual, well, probably not an annual here, probably forms a great big tuber here. Japanese beetles love them, and they're poisonous to Japanese beetles. So it's not like going out and spraying some chemical where they've been touched by the hand of God and go dead. This is, they'll nibble in there, but it will reduce the pressure on your other plants. I've seen it planted in rose gardens, really doing a good job. I've done it around hibiscus at my house, and it really has reduced the problems with my Japanese beetles. Of course, it doesn't matter where you go. Deer are the big problem. They're a huge problem here. They're a huge problem other places. I used to write a column for a newspaper. And every once in a while I'd write about deer and say the best thing you can do is get a good dog. I grew up out in the country. The best thing you can do is get a good gun. But they don't like it when you put that in the newspaper and tell people to shoot deer. And so I'd say, get a good dog. And then I would get pictures like this. And I said a good dog. That is not a good dog. That's a very bad dog. I actually asked for Christmas last year. I moved into a new house. And I said I'm on the end of this cul-de-sac. We have woods around us. I have deer through my yard all the time. My wife loves it. She sends me pictures of the deer constantly because they're constantly in my yard. And I said, for Christmas, I want a bucket of throwing rocks just to keep by the front door so I can open up my door and I can throw a nice, smooth river stone at the deer. I'm not going to hurt the deer. I played soccer because I've got no hand-eye coordination. Have no foot-eye coordination either, but it's easier to run around and look busy on a soccer field without hitting the ball. But it would make me feel better to throw those rocks at the deer. I did not get a bucket of rocks for Christmas, and I'm still a little salty about it. Armadillo. This is the one thing I put in the book that I don't have much personal experience with them. And I was looking up some things about, how to deal with them, how to prevent them. And there were several places online that said they don't like pine straw. So you put pine straw around there. And where's the first place that I ever saw armadillo damage? Was walking around with Dave Creech out the piney woods, and there was a lot of pine straw on the ground, and there was a lot of some armadillo problems there. I asked somebody else in South Georgia where they're having a lot of armadillo problems with them, and he said you got to give them the double tap, one in the back, one in the head. That's the only way to deal with an armadillo. They're not in North Carolina yet. They're in South Carolina. They're in Tennessee. They're on their way. When the book came out, I did like this 3-hour interview with somebody from the North Carolina newspaper. And we talked for about 30 seconds about armadillo. What comes out in the newspaper, the headline, Gardening in the South and the Coming Armadillo Invasion. Did I get a bucket of throwing rocks? No, but I got T-shirts with armadillos on them, and I have mugs with armadillos on them from my family. No, we don't have them in North Carolina yet. We're lucky. But for me, the number one stop gardening insect, the biggest garden pest out there are mosquitoes. And there are wet years like this year for us where I basically stopped gardening for a month or two while the mosquitoes get bad. But another little home remedy for this, some of you may know this, I've been hearing more and more people who know about this, is beautyberry. You know beautyberry, Calicarpa americana, or ditchweed if you're in South Georgia. You take the leaves of that and just rub them on you, and I'm telling you, it's about as good as Deep Woods Off. It really does a good job. I have never tried. I keep saying I'm going to try, some of the Japanese beautyberries or Mexican versus the American ones. Try them on different arms and see if there's a difference. I've not done that yet. Somebody told me that the Asian ones don't work, but I have no proof of that. But it actually does work pretty good. I mean, DEET doesn't do. I mean, it does okay, but we got some killer mosquitoes around us. It doesn't always work. The Calicarpa does pretty well. So, I talked about the mulch, and if you know how you're using the mulch, it makes sense. Same thing with diseases. People really struggle with diseases, and it's pretty simple. Same thing for people as plants, right? You have 3 things. You have a susceptible host, you have conducive environment, you have the pathogen. That's why when it comes wintertime, people get sick. People are inside more, so you have a more conducive environment because people are crammed together. You have more susceptible hosts together. It's why older people and younger people should get flu vaccines because they're more susceptible. The pathogen's out there. A lot of times we can't deal with that, so you deal with some of these other things in there. So, you get the disease. So, if you have a less susceptible host, if you plant a dogwood that's less powdery mildew, that's more powdery mildew resistant, you'll have less powdery mildew. You take that dogwood and you plant it kind of out in the open where it gets some good breezes around there, less water sitting on the leaves, you'll have a less conducive environment. The pathogen's out there. You haven't done a thing, but you've made the other areas smaller so you have less disease. And if you know that, if you're getting a disease and you think through these things, you can often manage it. Roses, we love our roses, right? Tyler, right up the street. We put in a huge we put in a new rose garden at the Ralston Arboretum, and I worked with a rose company, and I said, what are the best roses for Raleigh? And this company, that's all they do is rose care. And they gave me a list, and we got those plants, and then afterwards they said, so do you want to contract with us? We'll give you a deal on the contract to maintain them. And I said, well, what does that mean? They said, well, we'll come out every 7 to 10 days and spray. I said, well, I thought these were the best roses. And they said, yeah, they are if you spray them every 7 to 10 days. I said, no, forget it. We're not spraying. So we're come back and see if we have a rose garden in a couple of years. We're being ruthless. We'll rip it out. It's got 2 years. If it looks bad 2 years in a row, it's gone. But, you get all kinds of things like black spot. So, we know we have a susceptible host. We know we have the pathogen. We know we have a conducive environment because we're in the South and all these fungal things love us down here in the South. So we have that disease. So what do we do with roses? How do we plant roses? We jam them all. Well, what we should do is spread them out. What we do is we jam them all together, right? We put a whole bunch of them. And you know what? That makes a really conducive environment when you do that. You have more disease. My old boss at Norfolk, we had 3,000 roses. Ugh, kill me now. That was awful dealing with 3,000 roses there. But my boss hated that we changed out the mulch every year. It's expensive to buy all that mulch, rake it all out, put in new mulch. And he wanted me to put in rubber mulch, ground up tires out there. So if you do that, that pathogen overwinters in that mulch and you have more pathogen. That's what you have, more disease. You haven't done a thing about the host, you got that susceptible rose. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me they had the most disease-resistant rose in their garden, I say, oh yeah? And they said, it never has a problem. I said, how many roses do you have? They said, oh, just the one, because it's a great one. It's like, there you go. If you have that one rose, no problem. It's when you jam 50 of them together that you have a problem. Vegetable gardening, I love eating vegetables. I'm not a big vegetable gardener. I grew up with a big vegetable garden, and it killed, having to go out there and weed and harvest, killed any interest I have in having my own vegetable garden. But people who do, that's often the way people get into gardening, and this is what they want, right? This is what they envision, and they try to do this. And I always tell people, if you're not a vegetable gardener, or not a gardener really at all, don't even think about this. Do this. Plant a handful of plants, pick out a little spot with sun, put them in there, and have success. Because you're going to feel guilty when your big area gets weedy, and it's going to get weedy if you've cleared a new spot. But if you have just a little bit, you can manage it. If you like it, expand it. All I do personally with vegetable gardening is a few tomatoes that are in the front yard that little cherry tomatoes that I can eat while I'm out there weeding and doing other gardening. Always plant, here's the key if you're going to eat them right out of the garden, always plant your cherry tomatoes with some basil beside it. And then you just wrap your cherry tomatoes, basil while you're gardening. Oh, it's great. Warm in the sun. And people want this, even if it's a small area. They want it all in the, like, why do that? That's a lot of work. You're going to harvest the stuff anyway. Let it do this. You thin it by pulling out those nice fresh young greens, and once you thin it out, it'll spread out. You can thin it out so you have more or less nice rows. But people think that it's supposed to look like a certain thing, and it doesn't have to. You can be successful.
That's the way all the diagrams, you've seen them.
Well, yeah, right. All the diagrams are like this, yeah. Yeah, that's too much work. It looks prettier that way, I think. And where I do vegetables at home, I try and do, perennial vegetables. I don't do annual stuff, man. If I got to replant it every year, forget it. Other than the handful of tomatoes and basil. But, things like asparagus that come back year after year are great. And they're perfect because you can put them at the back of the border, and they look beautiful coming up around your other plants and behind them. They're gorgeous plants. I grew up out in the country thinking that the only way to grow asparagus was to have creosote railroad ties and, about a 6-foot square and plant your asparagus in the middle of that. That was the only way I ever saw it growing. I thought there was some symbiotic relationship between creosote and asparagus. As a kid, I thought that's where the taste came from. Turf, let me just say, if the only time you go on your turf is to mow it, blow it, weed eat it, spray it, fertilize it, you have too much turf. Get rid of it. Use turf as a feature, not as the default. If we have this habit of talking about diagrams, you have your house and it's surrounded by turf, right? And then you decide where you want beds. We've got to flip that so that you have your house and it's all planted around there. And then you decide where you want turf. So if you have kids that are playing, young kids that are playing soccer out there, a dog that needs to run around, a putting green you want, have turf. If you got bocce tournaments, have turf. But if the only time you go on your turf is to maintain your turf, you need to get rid of some of it because it doesn't have much of a environmental use. It supports the Japanese beetle grubs very well. It is permeable, so water goes into it, so it's better than asphalt. If you fertilize it a lot, it might be worse than asphalt. So it's, really, if you use it as a feature, this perfectly round spot is a meeting spot where a lot of different paths come in. That makes sense. If you're barbecuing, that makes sense. But there are some great alternatives that don't take a lot of water, that don't take a lot of fertilizer. Something like this. You don't want to walk on that. It's little tussocks of grass. It's not going to be great to walk on, but it gives you kind of that visual equivalent. And with something like this, you just go to your neighbor. The maintenance is you go to your neighbor, you borrow their lawnmower in late winter, you mow over it once at the highest setting, you bring the lawnmower back, give them a bottle of wine, a 6-pack of beer, whatever they prefer, and say thanks. I'll see you next year. You get rid of your mower and everything. It's great. Or where you want it, if you want that lush green turf, use it for pathways. I have this whole collection from all around the world of keep off the grass signs, and they confuse me because I don't see any reason for grass if you're not going to be on it. It's not that interesting to look at. So, fill the beds and do that. And, if you do that, if you think about landscapes that way, you've got all this habitat then, right? But if everybody on your street is doing that, and then everybody in your neighborhood, all of a sudden you've created these wildlife corridors, you've really made gardens useful. And you don't have to think so much about which plant is a good plant for X, for birds, for pollinators, for whatever. What you need is a diversity of plants. We have beehives at the Arboretum. When we had the honey analyzed last time, maples, willows, all these things that we don't think about as pollinator plants were the biggest pollinator plants. And when we first put our beehives out, the beekeeper we're working with came out, when it started getting cold with sugar water put out by the beehives, like you need to do in case it warms up and the bees start getting active. Well, he wound up taking honey off the hives. And for the past, I think it's been 9 or 10 years that we've had them, we take honey off the beehives all winter long because we have things flowering all year long. We have 7,000 different plants. Something's going. When it's warm outside and sunny and the bees are active, we have something for them all year round. And people don't get that, and they keep looking at these lists of good pollinator plants. You need things flowering all the time. You need to not worry about the lists and not worrying about, is this good, is this bad, and plant a diversity, and you will have good things out there. Our native pollinators, our native solitary bees and things, they don't care where the plant comes from. There is no good research that shows that. They care about the size and shape of flower. That's it. If it's compatible with them, that works. So I'm going to talk a little bit about plants. It's hard for me to go anywhere without talking about plants. Some of the things that I'm really loving, these evergreen dogwoods. There's a few floating around. We were looking at some today. Hongkongensis doesn't sound like it should be hardy at all. It is great. It's smaller plants, kind of a little more shrubby. It's like a kusa, somewhat shrubby kusa dogwood, perfectly evergreen. This one, Cornus hongkongensis gecko. Gecko means moonshine or moonlight in Japanese, not moonshine. This we got from a nurseryman who was growing this in the mountains in zone 6. Never has any damage on it. Turns purple in the winter. It's gorgeous. Has kusa dogwood flowers. Has beautiful red fruits. And we moved on this. JC really tried to push some of these really great, unusual plants. We were looking at Eucaphus today. Eucaphus, fantastic plant. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody grows it. But you take something like a dogwood, and you say, here's a dogwood, and it's evergreen. Or here's a maple, and it's evergreen. We're growing a lot of evergreen maples now, and there's some really good ones. This is one that was hardy 200 hours straight below freezing, 6 degrees, had a little bit of tip dieback, about 6 inches of tip dieback at 6 degrees. Been great. Comes out burgundy, the stems are burgundy, kind of goes blue-green in the sun. Amazing, amazing plant. Weeping native beech. If we can get this thing grafted successfully, it's going to be a great plant. There's basically no American beech cultivars. There's a million European beech ones, but almost none American ones. And this is like a little Japanese maple.
Where was this plant found?
This plant was found in Caswell County, North Carolina, on an alpaca farm. Okay, I forgot about this. It's a true story. So somebody came to me at a trade show and said, I've got a dwarf weeping American beech. And I said, oh, that's interesting. No, you don't have a dwarf. They don't exist. It ain't out there. And I said, that's really interesting. I'd love to see a picture of it sometime. And I assumed it was a tree that something had fallen on it and broken it off, and it was just growing kind of horizontal, hadn't put up a leader. And she brought a picture of it, and it was a kind of a fuzzy printout of a picture. And okay, I'll go out there. So I go out there, and then she says, well, it's not actually my property. It's my neighbor's. So we had to go over to the neighbors who had an alpaca farm. And we get in this ATV vehicle, several of us, and we drive out there by this. And darn it, this thing in this beautiful little weeping American beech, and I flip out, I'm going crazy over it. And the property owner said, well, this is right by the trail I used to get to my deer stand. If you like it this much, let's go get some shovels and dig it up and take it out of here. So I'm, like, okay, I always want to propagate something before we dig up the only one in existence. So we dig it and we move it. The next day, I get an email from somebody who will not be named saying, I heard you're stealing weeping beeches out of the woods in North Carolina. Send wood. It's like, what? I still don't know how word got to him, but it was literally the next day that I got that from. Some people can just, they're plant whisperers. They can hear it across the country. If we ever get it propagated, you got the first one. You made the first request. I know this is floating around down here now. There's some great osmanthus. I'm a firm believer that the line of where land is habitable and where it is not is the line at which osmanthus fragrans grows. Anywhere where osmanthus fragrans doesn't grow is not fit for humans to live there. Those people that do live up there, that's on them. They're like savages up there. Osmanthus fragrans is, everybody should have this. There's a great friend of mine, a nurseryman, Ted Stevens. I don't know if he's ever been down here to talk. He shares my love, unreasonable love for osmanthus. And I had a Chinese nurseryman friend visit. And we were down at Ted Stevens' place, Nurseries Caroliniana, and we were getting some plants. And Ted was at his computer making labels for us. He was getting the labels done. And my buddy, Lou, gets on the other computer and says, because we've been talking osmanthus, and he pulls up this website from this nursery with this plant. Comes out hot pink and then goes white and green, and a couple of variegated ones that I believe are all here now. And he calls Ted over to come look at these pictures, and Ted looks at them. You gotta know Ted. Oh my word. Mark, are you seeing this? Oh my word. Can you bookmark this for me? And so his bookmark, I don't know what Ted's doing at night looking at his pictures of osmanthus, but so Ted goes over to the other computer to finish up those labels, and he sits down and just sits there. And finally he calls to one of his nursery workers and says, Wayne, you need to come over here and finish this up. I just can't think right now. I cannot think right now. He was so taken with these plants, he could no longer function. So when I actually gave him one, he was eternally grateful. Every time I go visit him, I remind him. I was like, "How are those osmanthus doing? They're doing good. Oh, that's a nice plant there. I'd love to get a piece of that. Yeah." We're also doing a lot with Mahonia. That was one of the plants JC loved, and we still work a lot with there. There's so many of them out there that aren't spiny, nasty things that'll bite you. This Mahonia shenii. This is like a lot of our plants. We think this is the first one in the U.S., but it's not the only one now. We've been distributing it. Can't send seedlings out because all the seedlings are hybrids, but we've been slowly propagating this plant. It's a beautiful thing. Great things. I saw this planted out over in the garden, Elysium swamp hobbit. Elysiums are deer-proof. And now there's some great dwarf ones. Swamp hobbit, little tiny thing. We've got 2 out of NC State. Orion and Scorpio that are about 4 feet tall, 5 feet wide. Scorpio has red flowers. Orion has white flowers out of the breeding program of Tom Ranney. Some great things with Elysium now. There really are amazing stuff. I know there's a really good collection here. We're amassing a good collection. So many good ones. Have I sent you Laura Murphy? I've got another one that's a compact one that's really nice, really glossy, dark green. Laura Murphy. We've got to get that to you. Edgeworthia, we love our Edgeworthia. Look at that pink on there. Isn't that pretty nice? Wow. Fragrant. Seems to be a good grower. We're going to get that out. Stachyurus. This is one of those ones with weird names that we can't sell, People come by and see it, this beautiful, subtly variegated Stachyurus from the Arboretum. They see it in flower. It's like a 70s bead curtain. They say, oh, this is gorgeous. But it's flowering in February, and nobody's going plant shopping in February, and nobody wants this when it's not flowering. It really is a handsome plant. hydrangeas, we love hydrangeas, especially the oak leaves. This ice crystal is kind of the finest textured one, but the one we're really excited about is Turkey Heaven. Terrible name for a great plant. You have this? From Hayes, down in Alabama. Terrible name. This is exciting. So it's got these huge double heads, like Harmony, if you know Harmony, but they're even bigger for us and it's sturdier for us. But what's the most exciting thing about this? You grow this in a garden, you love it. Problem with oak leaf hydrangeas in the nursery is they get all kinds of leaf spot. They look fine in the spring. In the fall, they look terrible when they're trying to sell them. This stays clean. It stays clean in the nursery. I mean, it's like night and day compared to just about any other one out there. So some of the North Carolina nurserymen, the way around trying to sell Turkey Heaven, because nobody's buying Turkey Heaven hydrangea, is we're going to put a trade name on it. Not trademark, not protected, but just call it Carefree Cloud, because people will buy that. Carefree Cloud. No TM, none of that. It's just, I fought against that for years and years and all that stuff, and I finally decided, if it helps a nurseryman sell a plant, then, let them have it. I can't be a purist anymore. The spice bushes, these have been really good with, again, for deer as well. This is one we love, Togarashi. It's got these chartreuse leaves with green spots on there. Togarashi is this 5-pepper kind of spice that you get on that you find in Japan. They have it on salt, pepper, and togarashi, and you sprinkle it on your food. So it's all sprinkled. It is such a cool plant. Brought it back from Japan 3 times before I got it going, but it is going now, and it's great. We have to get some out. It roots, so it's good. No, we don't just do woody plants. We do have some of the mushy stuff out there. Salvia New Yar. It's not New Year. It's New Yar. It's Yiddish. It's out of Israel. This is a cross between Salvia officinalis, which doesn't love our heat, and Salvia fruticosa, which does love our heat. And it's better than either of them. It's this quick spreading plant. It grows when it's in flower, a couple feet tall, flowers like crazy. If you dry the leaves, it is better than Salvia officinalis, the culinary sage. It has more of that sage flavor. It is awesome. It is so, we love this plant. We got it under a different name and then tracked down the correct name for it. It is great. Fuzzy silver leaves. It'd be perfectly evergreen for you here. It gets a little funky during the winter for us, but we give it a haircut and it pops up and flowers like mad, like no other salvia I've ever seen. It's a great plant. Aspidistras, we love our aspidistras. This is one that doesn't have a name yet. I'm still waiting. We auctioned off the naming rights for this Aspidistra sichuanensis. It's the brightest, spottest one we'd ever seen. That was in our gala. It gave somebody the opportunity to name the thing, and he hadn't named it yet, so he may lose out on it. Give you a couple pictures of the newest of the new. We're only allowed to start showing pictures of these recently. Weeping Gold redbuds. These are being introduced by Denny Werner in the Ralston Arboretum. Even better, Flamethrower. Comes out burgundy, goes chartreuse. It's unreal. This is a real breakthrough plant. We're excited about it. Officially, it came out this fall. When production wasn't up, there were some issues with a cold snap that killed off the new grafts. But by next fall, there should be a lot of them because everybody is flipping out over this plant. So it's being grafted like crazy. I have to make sure y'all have it down here.
First time in North Carolina, and then it goes out. So, is that right?
It is the nurseries that work with Denny Werner on this. The North Carolina nurseries have first shot at buying it, but that's mostly coming from Hidden Hollow in Tennessee. He's working with a nursery in Oklahoma as well that North Carolina nurserymen probably aren't buying too much from. So I think it'll go well. And we've got some even better red buds coming down the road. There's going to be some good stuff. Going back to gardening, gardens are really personal. This is somebody who spends more time in their garden than I do at work and with my family. There is not a plant out of place there, but they want that kind of wild, exuberant look, and they want. And some people want, this very clean, serene look, and gardens should be about whatever makes you happy. This when I'm stopped being a lazy gardener, this is what I aspire to. This is one of the best plantsman's gardens I've ever been to. Or as life gets crazier and more out of control, I keep looking around going, I'd like a clipped hedge here. I know I won't clip hedges, but I have a friend who does something like this every year in his garden. This is the same picture where I had the turf path and all those plants. It's a really wildly planted garden. But he's got this 10-foot little circle off his patio, and every year he'll cut a little piece of turf out and do something different. The year before he cut like a 6-foot circle out, put that same urn right in the middle of it, and had some annual plantings around that kind of real French kind of style. This year he did it right off the steps of his little pad, did that, and it adds. He's got this wild, exuberant garden, and he has this one little bit of formality, and it just makes. That way, when things are really out of control, you look at that and think, well, it must be on purpose that it's all out of control, because look how carefully that's been done. It's a great way to do it. This garden, they didn't care about having ornamental grasses here, right? They had a squid sculpture, and they wanted the plants there, and that's fine. I've learned that it's about whatever makes you happy. I used to put this picture in talks, kind of a laugh line there. I'd talk about color echoes. You got the orange mulch back here, and the orange pumpkins, and even some orange mini blinds to really tie the landscape to the house and everything. And this was somebody who lived around the corner from me when I was in Norfolk. And this woman spent a tremendous amount of time out in the garden, and that's what she wanted. And who am I to laugh at what she's doing? That was her garden. It was very personal. And I've grown to, I actually was in Norfolk about a month and a half ago, and the house is for sale, and everything's been ripped out. It really made me sad. I came to really love this garden because of the care that she put into it. It was much better than everybody who had the same, foundation plantings, the same, it had personality. So whatever makes you happy is what you should do. I'm trying to convince my wife that, because she's not a plant person. There's some give and take in what she thinks is okay. We're still working on the turf. We got a little bit of turf. I'm trying to get rid of it. But I'm really lucky. I get to see gardens and visit places all over the world. Go to a place like Cuba, and that's looking out from Hemingway's, where he would write from, and Kirstenbach in South Africa, one of the great botanic gardens. Dunedin in New Zealand. We're taking a group to New Zealand next month. In less than a month now. Great places. I go all over, go to Asia, so it was great. I'm up in mountains in Taiwan. I come around a corner by a road, and I'm like, finally, Southern gardening is going worldwide. It's fantastic. So hope y'all will come visit us at the Arboretum. We're open free every day during daylight hours, basically. Some glamour shots. I don't know. I probably went long because I started talking. If you got a couple of questions, I'm happy to answer them until somebody kicks me off the stage. 10 and a half. And I wish we had more. It kills me. We bring in about between 1,000 and 1,500 new plants a year, which means we have to kill a whole bunch to get them out, which is it's hard to keep the chainsaw sharp enough to keep those plants going. Luckily, we're good at killing plants. It's a real skill. Well, thank y'all all. Oh. How many visitors do we have? We have no idea. We are getting some trail counters. We're going to start counting people probably before this spring starts. We're going to start doing that. Depending on the director at the time and how we think it would best serve us, it could be 100,000 or 50,000 or 25,000. You know, if we want to seem really sad and pathetic, it's 25,000. If we want to seem really successful, it's 100,000. But they're all guesses. We have not even an estimate. We know we had a program this, an event, 6-day event. We brought in about 6,800 people for that this year. We bring in for our big plant sale, we bring in, depending on the weather, about 2,000 people. So, just with those big events, it adds up pretty quickly. But daily visitors, we're pretty heavily used by the community.
Plant sale for Austin, the is a distribution, is it not? You buy a membership and
Well, we have a plant sale. That's a traditional sale. But the giveaway, the distribution, yes, if you're a member, you come out before 9 on the first Saturday of October, and we get everybody lining up, and we blow a whistle, and everybody can grab some plants. It used to be a free-for-all. We've calmed it down. There's some structure to it. You can only get 3 plants at a time, then you have to get back behind the line. It's a lot of fun. I go out there, I have bullhorn, I yell at people if they're trying to grab too many plants. Or
when I was on sabbatical with Austin, I was bouncing. I was in Texas, so I would make sure that everybody was. But it was hopeless in a way.
Back in the day, it was a free-for-all. A whistle was blown and people would just grab everything. And you'd see, some young guy with 30 plants, and there'd be, a little old lady with a cane and a black eye and, one little broken off plant. And so we've calmed it down. So people get the plants they want, and everybody gets a lot of plants.
They used to have an Oklahoma land rush.
Is that right?
Plant sale. It was chaos.
Yeah, we've tried to calm it down. All right.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
There you go.